This just crossed from uncomfortable into dangerous, not because of what Democrats are saying, not because of what cable news is amplifying, but because of what's happening inside Donald Trump's own political firewall. Something just shifted in Washington, and it's no longer subtle. Here's what's unfolding. For the first time in a long time, the resistance isn't coming from outside Trump's orbit. It's coming from within it. Republican lawmakers, many of whom spent years defending, excusing, or normalizing his behavior, are now moving to restrict the very authority Trump is determined to expand, quietly, methodically, and with growing urgency. This isn't ideological disagreement. This is institutional alarm. Pay attention to that distinction. This is not about policy preferences or broken campaign promises. It's about power, who holds it, how it's used, and whether any meaningful limits still apply when the president decides they don't. The clash underway right now is over whether American governance still operates under law or whether it bends to the impulses of one individual who sees constraint as an insult. Here's where it turns serious. Behind closed doors, phones have been lighting up across Capitol Hill. Late-night calls, emergency meetings, senators rereading statements they hoped they misunderstood, not because Trump is angry at Democrats or the press, but because he's furious at his own party. That matters. When internal loyalty fractures, it signals something deeper than political theater. It means the system's internal guardrails are finally engaging, and those guardrails don't activate over nothing. They activate when lawmakers sense risk that extends beyond a news cycle. Right now, Republican senators are confronting a president who has openly entertained the use of extraordinary powers, emergency declarations, and even military force in ways that strain legal boundaries and alliance commitments. This isn't abstract. This is operational. And once that line is crossed rhetorically, the machinery doesn't wait for clarification. What makes this moment different is the target of Trump's escalation. He isn't lashing out at opponents. He's lashing out at constraints, at Congress, at the idea that his authority might be conditional. And that's the trigger. Presidents who believe power is personal do not respond calmly when reminded it is borrowed. Look at the pattern. When resistance emerges, Trump doesn't de-escalate. He amplifies. He reframes disagreement as sabotage. He reaches for crisis language. He declares emergencies, not always because an emergency exists, but because emergencies shift the rules. They centralize authority. They compress debate. They reward speed over scrutiny. This presidency has leaned on that playbook repeatedly, and it's happening again. At the center of the current revolt is a scenario that not long ago would have sounded too absurd to seriously discuss. The President of the United States floating the use of military pressure in a context that could place America in conflict with its own allies. Strip away the branding and bravado, and the implications are stark. Territory that belongs to a NATO partner is not a bargaining chip. NATO's core principle is collective defense. Any military action against allied territory is not symbolic. It's a legal and strategic catastrophe. The fact that senators now feel compelled to explain this publicly tells you everything about how normalized the abnormal has become. These are not hypothetical musings anymore. They are statements being weighed by lawmakers who understand that once a president treats military force as a negotiating tool, the consequences don't remain theoretical for long. No one voted for a presidency that risks conflict with allies over acquisition fantasies. Yet here we are, parsing remarks, weighing intent, and watching members of Trump's own party step in to shut doors that should never have been opened. This isn't betrayal, it's containment. Trump's worldview helps explain the backlash. He does not approach geopolitics through alliances, treaties, or shared security. He sees leverage, property, deals to be forced. That mindset might work in private business. In global politics, it destabilizes regions and costs lives. Republican senators know this. They understand that once unilateral action is framed as acceptable, Congress becomes irrelevant unless it reasserts itself. That's why the War Powers Act suddenly became the battlefield, not as an academic debate, but as an emergency break. When Republicans joined Democrats to advance measures limiting unilateral military authority, it wasn't accidental. It was calculated. And Trump's response told the rest of the story. He didn't persuade, he didn't negotiate, he exploded. Profanity, threats, intimidation, because that's how someone reacts when they believe power is personal and discover it's not. The reported confrontation with Senator Susan Collins wasn't about a single vote. It was about shock. The shock of learning that loyalty has limits, that even inside his own party there are lines that cannot be crossed without resistance. For Trump, that realization is existential. His political strategy depends on projecting inevitability and total control. Internal dissent shatters that illusion faster than any external criticism ever could. From there, the escalation accelerates. Faced with pushback, Trump reframes himself as besieged. He leans harder into emergency authority. The declaration of emergency powers tied to Venezuelan oil assets fits perfectly into this pattern. It allows him to posture as the sole defender of national security while recasting dissent as obstruction. The underlying reality is far more complex: long timelines, uncertain infrastructure, benefits flowing primarily to multinational corporations rather than ordinary Americans. But complexity isn't the point. Dominance is. Emergencies aren't about feasibility, they're about control. They redirect attention away from uncomfortable questions, and there are many right now. Why promised transparency initiatives stalled? Why document releases lagged? Why oversight advanced only after bipartisan pressure rather than executive initiative? When senators begin publicly raising concerns about Inspector General compliance and missed deadlines, it signals process failure, not an accusation. A warning. Process failures terrify administrations built on speed and narrative control, because processes leave records. Records don't disappear when the headlines move on. That's why these stories are inseparable. Republican revolt, war powers, emergency declarations, stalled disclosures. They are the same story from different angles. A presidency attempting to outrun accountability by accelerating chaos. Republicans who once waved everything through are now calculating the cost of silence. They're weighing institutional damage against party loyalty. They're realizing that if they don't act now, they may not recognize the system later. When a president openly suggests he is guided solely by personal judgment rather than law or precedent, the issue stops being partisan. It becomes structural. Behind the scenes, Republicans are asking themselves a question they never wanted to confront. Is stopping Trump betrayal? Or is it preservation? History doesn't reward volume, it records intervention. This revolt, quiet in some corners and explosive in others, may be the first real test of whether internal guardrails still function when pressure comes from the highest office. As the rebellion deepens, the focus shifts from what Trump is saying publicly to what Republicans are doing privately, coordinating, comparing notes, deciding where to draw lines that once felt unthinkable. When the War Powers Resolution advanced with Republican votes, it wasn't a lapse in discipline. It was a recognition that once unilateral military threats toward allied territory are normalized, Congress either reasserts itself or becomes decorative. That fear isn't ideological, it's constitutional. The War Powers Act exists for moments exactly like this, moments when presidential instinct outruns institutional safeguards. Trump's reaction only reinforced concerns. Decision-making driven by impulse, by grievance, by obsession with legacy. Legacy matters here. Trump's fixation on dominance collides with the reality that his promises haven't produced restraint or stability. When the myth of no new wars collapses under aggressive rhetoric, fractures appear even among loyalists. Wars aren't abstractions. They're costs, risks, consequences. Republican senators facing re-election know this. No amount of branding can sell conflict with allies as victory. That's why Trump's pivot to emergency powers feels less like leadership and more like panic. Emergencies bypass debate. They marginalize dissent. They reframe oversight as sabotage. This tactic has a long global history. Leaders who feel authority slipping reach for extraordinary measures to freeze the moment in their favor. In this case, economic assets are framed as security imperatives. The narrative widens, the scrutiny narrows, oversight becomes the enemy. And this is where Trump's relationship with his party turns openly adversarial. He doesn't seek support, he demands submission. Independence is treated as betrayal. Careers are threatened publicly while dependence continues privately. That contradiction exposes fragility. Power built on fear eventually turns inward. Lawmakers sense that Trump's rhetoric about authority is no longer symbolic. It's operational. When rules are treated as optional, precedent becomes permanent damage. Norms don't regenerate automatically. If they collapse now, they don't return without cost. This anxiety has transformed routine votes into flashpoints, phone calls into confrontations, policy disagreements into existential tests, all unfolding against public fatigue and confusion. That confusion isn't accidental. A crowded information environment favors chaos. Trump has always understood that if everything is breaking news, nothing is accountability. That's why convergence matters. The war powers fight, emergency declarations, Republican revolt, oversight delays. These are stress fractures in a system pushed beyond design limits. Silence becomes consent. That realization has shifted the internal tone from loyalty to triage. The question inside the GOP is no longer how to help Trump win the next cycle. It's how to prevent irreversible institutional damage after he's gone. That shift explains the urgency. This revolt isn't ideological. It's alarm-driven. Trump senses it. His rhetoric grows darker, his demands louder. Leaders who feel control slipping don't slow down. They accelerate. They insist only they can prevent collapse, even as their actions generate instability. That paradox defines this moment. While public debate fixates on emergencies and war powers, a quieter pressure builds. Oversight doesn't rush. It accumulates. Each missed deadline, each delayed document, each Inspector General inquiry adds weight. Crises don't erase paper trails. Processes don't forget. This isn't about a single vote or declaration. It's about whether governance still functions when pressure comes from the presidency itself. Resistance that isn't partisan, but procedural, institutional. Lawmakers may disagree on ideology, but they increasingly share one truth: power justified solely by personal will, insulated by emergency language, enforced through intimidation, eventually turns on the system that legitimizes it. Republicans know this, even if they hesitate to say it aloud. Today's shortcuts become tomorrow's precedents. Once created, they belong to whoever comes next. That awareness has turned unease into action. Votes for restraint, oversight framed as necessity, distance created not from disloyalty, but survival. Trump responds with escalation, more apocalyptic framing, more loyalty tests, more insistence that only he can save the nation, even as the instability deepens. That contradiction defines the closing act of this presidency: a leader boxed in by process, a party torn between alignment and preservation, institutions forced to decide whether they will function or merely perform. It's tempting to dismiss this as just another episode. That would miss the point. The real question isn't whether Trump wins the next argument. It's whether the rules governing power remain stronger than those who temporarily hold it. That question doesn't belong to one party. It belongs to everyone who expects stability over spectacle. Systems don't fail overnight. They erode until someone finally says no. Right now, that no is coming from inside. From Republicans who understand that restraint isn't betrayal, it's responsibility. Whether that responsibility holds will shape not just this presidency, but everyone that follows. This isn't noise, it's a signal, and ignoring it would be the real risk.